I have a congenital visual problem called retinitis pigmentosa. I was born with it, but it's luckily for me a slowly progressive condition. In some people it makes them blind very quickly. I still have some vision, although I can't do a lot of the things I used to be able to do. But I can still enjoy life and do a whole hell of a lot of things. And you know, I'm not anyone who's going to take no for an answer. I'm going to push and try and live my life to the fullest, and I think that's what we all need to do. I have problems with mobility. I had to give up driving about 20 years ago. I used to ride my bike all over, and I had to give that up about almost 10 years ago. And several years ago I started working with a cane, and I now have Bruno, who's asleep in the corner, my guide dog. Luckily for me, there's all this assisted technology out there that's helped me, continue to do my work, although in somewhat different ways. I work with a computer software program that reads the screen to me in a computer voice. I've trained my ear to hear it very fast. You wouldn't believe it. If you'd like, I'll give you a demonstration. It's people say, come on, you can't be understanding that, and I am. So I can kind of speed read with it. I've learned, I had problems with the mouse. I couldn't kind of put the cursor in the right place because the screen has all this glare for me, and I kind of tried and gave up a number of times, but I stuck with it and finally learned with this JAWS program, the software program, and I learned how to touch type. I used to kind of hunt and peck. I learned typing probably when I was in high school, and did it in college and law school, but was spoiled all of these years by having secretaries both in practice and here, and I'm a good dictator. I know how to do that. I developed ways of dealing without doing my own typing, but you know what? I've now learned how to do my own typing as a result of this wonderful computer technology. I have a little cell phone that actually takes a picture of a document and reads it to me in about 30 seconds in a computer voice. I have a personal data assistant, a little PDA, that is designed for people with visual difficulties, that actually connects to a GPS device. So when I'm walking around in a strange city, I can have a little computer voice tell me where I am and what the corner is, and I can plot routes and the like. And so what I've done is I've developed a whole series of alternative ways of working that work for me. And I think there's an important lesson there. All of us have problems. Mine is a visual problem, but everyone has problems, and this is going to be the story of all of our lives as we age. We're going to develop difficulties in this area or that area, and the name of the game is don't give up. Compensation. Figure out other ways of dealing with whatever it was you were doing that allows you to get there or get as close to it as you can. I suppose I and others with my vision problem could have given up. Years ago I was thinking, God, here I am, a law professor who can hardly read. How am I going to be a law professor? How am I going to do my work? I couldn't read my lecture notes. Well, you know what? It's made me a much better lecturer. I don't have to have those yellow notes that I look at and that really become a barrier between me and my audience. I can speak right to the audience, and I can see a little of them, and I feel that I can communicate in a more direct, conversational way. So I think in a way there are silver linings to my problem, and there probably are to other kinds of disability. It's made me, as I say, a better lecturer. I've improved my ability to hear and to understand things. I have an amazing sense of memory and focus that I'm sure I wouldn't have if I had all the usual distractions of visual fields around me. So people with disability have other opportunities, and there are blessings and silver linings, and we're potentially our own worst enemies, because we sort of tell ourselves often, oh, I can't do that. And once we tell ourselves that, it's all over, because we're not going to try. It would have been easy, perhaps, for me 15 or 20 years ago to say, all right, I've had a career as a law professor, now I'm going to retire and take disability or whatever. I can't read so well anymore, I can't do this, I can't do that. Well, that's not true. I'm probably among the most productive members of my faculty. I've authored 10 or 12 books and over 100 law review articles, and I continue to pump it out. And I go all over the world and I give lectures. And I've just found alternative ways of doing it. I gave this talk recently here at our law school because we had Ellen Sachs, a professor at the University of Southern California, come down. She's a friend. She does mental health law, and she wrote a wonderful book about a year and a half ago, The Center Will Not Hold, in which she reveals that she's had schizophrenia all of these years and has been in and out of the hospital. And amazing story. Anyway, I invited her to come down, and we did a program on overcoming the barriers of stigma, the barriers of disability, the stigma of disability, because in ways we're really good role models for how someone with schizophrenia can do the job, someone with vision problems can do the job, and we are role models in a way of how much people can accomplish with problems. And I think there's a really important lesson there, and I do this, I'm increasingly giving this lecture. In fact, I recently spoke to the residents and doctors at Baskin Palmer Eye Institute at our medical school, and the title of my talk was The Psychology of Vision and of How Doctors Can Deal with Patients Who Are Visually Challenged. You know, all of us, even those without difficulties, tend to self-handicap. This is a concept from the psychological literature. We invent reasons to explain our failure. You know, we say, oh, I'm a lousy dancer, I can't dance, I have 2 left feet. I'm bad at math. Whatever it is. And once we tell ourselves that story, we never will be good dancers, good mathematicians, because we won't try, we won't set goals, we won't put in the energy. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so people with handicap of a variety of kinds have, of course, that tendency. And so I see an important part of my contribution to breaking down those barriers, to tell people that have handicaps that you need to try to challenge yourself, to really explore what the limits of your actual handicap are, and to pierce through those psychological limits. It's kind of like, you know, maybe an M&M with a peanut in the middle. Maybe the peanut represents the real extent of your handicap, and then all of the candy around it is the psychological extent. Well, that psychological extent is real, but it may not be necessary. And you might be able to do a lot of things that you think you can't do if you give yourself a chance. And if you use some of the assisted technology that's available now, take advantage of some of the things that the ADA offers, the Americans with Disability Act. And so at this very lecture, I talked about how, with a little help, Ellen is able to do all the wonderful things she does, with a little help from her doctors and her medication, with a little help from my guide dog, from my computer. I'm able to do a lot of things with a little help from our friends. And I actually sang a few lines from the song. And I think that's an important part of how I do see one of my roles. I'm going to write a future book about my vision problem that will, you know, in an autobiographical way, talk about some of these issues, but also make some of these more overarching points about how we should view handicap and disability, and how law and social policy should be, you know, redirected to maximize the potential of people with disability. Of course, this is a therapeutic jurisprudence theme.